Throughout the almost 700 chapters of Bleach, Kubo managed to create some of the most beloved characters within the shonen genre and anime as a whole. From Ukiura and the Espada, to the master gaslighter and king of toxicity, Aizen. With dozens of great characters, all with some of the best designs in manga, for many choosing a singular favorite character might prove difficult. This, however, has never been the case for me. While I would certainly consider myself a Bleach fan, I'm not as chronically obsessed with the series as I am many others. I generally like most of the characters in the series as a whole, but it's just not a franchise that typically enters my top pieces of fiction. There is one character, however, I find to be the exception. In fact, she might be my favorite female character of all time. That being the main focus of this video, Miss Rukia Kuchiki. Before I get into why I think Rukia as a whole is such a great character, I want to preface this video by saying this is an opinion piece and my personal interpretation. This is also the first time I'm trying a video like this, so leave a like and sub to the channel if you enjoy it, so I know to make more in the future. But besides that, I want to begin by talking about Rukia's introduction in the very first chapter of the series. I particularly love the way Kubo introduces her. She appears in Ichigo's bedroom while tracking down a hollow, and her appearance and just general vibe here is pretty mysterious. But before we can learn anything about her, Ichigo just kinda kicks her across the room, accusing her of being a burglar. She then tries to explain to Ichigo that she's a Shinigami before he once again tweaks out, flipping a table at her where she's forced to restrain him. This is notable due to the fact that earlier in the chapter, Ichigo was shown intimidating and beating up a group of thugs. Obviously, Ichigo is still just a normal human with no powers here, but Rukia is shown to be pretty powerful in comparison. She then ends up sending a spirit to the Soul Society, which gives us our first glimpse into what exactly a Shinigami does in this world, as well as insight into Rukia as a character, as she clearly cares about the spirit she passes on, trying to comfort him during the process. During the confrontation with the Hollow, Rukia sacrifices herself to save Ichigo, a human she just met not even 10 minutes ago, which reinforces the idea of her being a compassionate and caring person. So much so that she's willing to sacrifice herself for any random she comes across. She then gives Ichigo her powers, and this sets the entire story of Bleach into motion. Ichigo's life and the lives of those around them will never be the same from this point forward, instantly making Rukia one of the most important characters within the narrative. In Chapter 2, to the shock of Ichigo, she appears at his school announcing that he'll be temporarily taking over her duties as Shinigami, where he attempts to refuse, claiming he's not going to fight monsters for random strangers, displaying the difference between him and Rukia in terms of selflessness. Rukia then slaps Ichigo's soul out of his body and leads him to a hollow that's attacking a child. She tells him that you can't just save and protect the people closest to you, and the duty of a Shinigami is to protect and sacrifice yourself for any spirit. Ichigo ends up rejecting this idea in the moment, but as the series continues, Ichigo gradually adopts Rukia's Shinigami ideals. In only 2 chapters, Rukia has managed to accomplish introducing the main character and the viewer to a completely new world, give the MC his powers, set the entire events of the story into motion, and her actions and words have already started to have an effect on Ichigo as a character. And as the arc continues, she finds various ways to stay relevant in the plot, despite losing her Shinigami powers. During the Soul Society arc, Rukia is imprisoned and sentenced to death for allowing a human to gain Shinigami powers, and it's here we see just how bad her perception of herself is. Being forced to kill her best friend Kaien is something she hates herself for, despite the circumstances, and her childhood in the slums of the Rukangai have instilled her with a lack of self-worth. Coupled with the rocky relationship with Byakuya and her position within the Kuchiki family, it culminates with Rukia believing she's not worth fighting for, and that her upcoming execution is deserved, an execution that all of her friends and brother will be attending. Rukia, despite her inner monologue, clearly hasn't had the best life, but what I find so admirable is that while staring death in the face, she looks at Byakuya, the brother that's allowing and watching her about to be executed, and thanks him, along with everyone else there. Even while in her final moments, how poorly she's been treated by others, and the rough life she's had up until this point, there's no anger or malice towards anyone, not even towards the brother that's allowing this to happen. Rukia, despite her tough exterior, is an incredibly gentle, selfless, and compassionate person, willing to sacrifice herself for complete strangers, fight for the sake of protecting those who can't protect themselves, and even when facing death, she harbors no ill will for those allowing it to happen. All of these aspects make Rukia incredibly likable, and her life filled with hardships only makes the viewer more sympathetic to her. This feeling of sympathy is only compounded when we find out that the reason she grew up in the slums of the Rukangai is because she was abandoned by her older sister. Kubo really wanted the reader to feel bad for Rukia here, and while I can only speak for myself, I'd say it definitely worked. At the end of the arc, Byakuya reveals to Rukia the reasons behind the cold way he's treated her and asks her for forgiveness, allowing their relationship to start anew on a foundation of trust and care for one another. Up until this point, Rukia looked up to Byakuya as a role model, trying desperately to earn his respect and recognition, while he paid very little attention to her, almost acting as if she didn't even exist. But this dynamic would change going forward, and a real sibling bond would begin to form. The next day, Rukia visits the sister of her late friend Kaien to apologize for his death, despite killing him in self-defense after he was possessed by a hollow and attacked her in Ukitake. The guilt she feels because of this is partially what's to blame for the self-hatred she feels, and it's clearly caused her a significant amount of mental and emotional suffering. Once again, moments like this are what make Rukia so likable. She never blames others for her failures, never holds a grudge against those who wrong her, and takes responsibility for things that either aren't her fault or weren't in her control. As Ichigo leaves to return to the human world, him and Rukia have an exchange where Ichigo says something pretty significant. He thanks her because the rain has finally stopped, referring to the rain in his inner world, which symbolizes his guilt and self-loathing for failing to protect his mother as a child. But thanks to Rukia, he now has the power to protect those he cares about. This rain, or feelings of self-loathing, will return later in the series, but before we get into that, we have to talk about Rukia's place in the Arrancar arc. Rukia takes more of a supporting role in this arc, but before I talk about this next section, I want to quickly say that I love Orihime as a character. I don't want what I'm about to say to come off as slander towards her. I'm not interested in the online Rukia versus Orihime fan war, so to avoid coming off that way, I'll be giving her the flowers she deserves within this section as well. And if you guys enjoyed this video and want me to do one for her, I'd be down for that too. In chapter 198, we see Orihime talking to a photo of her brother, where she thinks back on past experiences and admits she's a bit envious of how amazing Rukia is. Later on, when spending the night with Rangiku, these thoughts and feelings resurface, where she has an emotional breakdown that's honestly really hard to read. I don't bring this up to make Orihime look bad and Rukia look good. I bring it up because Orihime is probably the most emotionally intelligent and pure-hearted character within the series. There's no ill will towards Rukia here. On the contrary, she has nothing but love, respect, and admiration for her, which is a testament to just how kind-hearted she is. Remember, this is the same girl that had empathy and compassion for Ukiura, the guy that kidnapped her and almost killed the love of her life. Orihime having such a strong reaction and feelings towards Rukia is about the best statement of character you could get within the world of Bleach. I think it speaks volumes about Rukia and just how impressive she is as a person, and this wouldn't mean much if Orihime herself wasn't the great character that she is. I have to praise Kubo for this scene because typically when a girl is depicted being jealous of another, it's usually showcased through very spiteful feelings or actions, but there's none of that here with Orihime. During the Arrancar attack, Rukia reveals her powers have returned, where we get our first real glimpse at her Zanpakuto, Sodai no Shirayuki, where she blitzes and one-shots D-Roy with Tsukishiro. It's absolutely insane that we're 200 chapters into the story and this is the first real fight and W that Rukia gets, but it's a satisfying and stylish one nonetheless. Unfortunately, she's then immediately stabbed by Grimmjow and taken out of commission. Her next fight is against Aranjero, and there's not a whole lot new to talk about here. Aranjero attempts to manipulate Rukia by looking like Kaien, which of course ends up failing. The fight ultimately ends up in a draw, with Rukia barely managing to kill the 9th Espada. One moment that stands out to me is the end. Rukia, unable to stand and bleeding out from a fatal wound, reflects on her time in the Soul Society, the loneliness of captivity, and how she felt being saved by a friend, wanting to extend that same courtesy to Orihime. In her near-death state, Rukia is almost killed by Zamari, where Byakuya appears to save her, completely contrasting his role in the previous arc. Right before killing the 7th Espada, he states that he's not just doing his duty as a Soul Reaper, but because Zamari aimed his blade at his pride, at Rukia. The entire fight showcases the impact that Ichigo has had on him, finally acting like the older brother he always should have. Not to mention admitting that Rukia is his pride is a heartwarming thing to see. Unfortunately, from this point, Rukia doesn't get a significant moment for almost 200 chapters, towards the end of the Fullbring arc. During the fight against Tsukishima and Ginjo, Ichigo is stripped of his Fullbring powers, and after using Mugetsu in the Arrancar arc, doesn't have access to his Soul Reaper abilities either. With the loss of his powers and no longer being capable of protecting his friends, these feelings of self-loathing and powerlessness return, symbolized both by Ichigo's inner monologue and the reappearance of the rain. But just like last time, Rukia appears and gives Ichigo the power to protect once more. One detail I love is that both in the manga and anime, the rain stops as soon as Rukia stabs Ichigo with the Reishi blade, and Rukia always being the one to save Ichigo and clear the rain within his heart is one of my favorite elements of the series. For the second time, Rukia's actions are a major contributor to the narrative, despite not being one of the strongest characters in the series. But for the most part, she doesn't get another major moment until her fight with Asnot in the war arc. Rukia's fight against Asnot is easily my favorite fight in the entire series. Rukia up until this point hasn't gotten many fights, and the ones she has gotten are typically against weaker opponents, which even then she doesn't catch a lot of W's. But after returning from the Royal Palace, we finally get to see just how much potential she really has. The first phase of the fight consists of Rukia just outsmarting Asnot in every way, slowly lowering her body temperature to the point that she can tank his fear ability with no effect. Seeing Rukia two-shot a character that defeated Byakuya really demonstrates just how far she's come. When Asnot transforms, Byakuya arrives to rescue Rukia from her fears, giving her the reassurance she needs to steal her resolve and finally acknowledging her power, something she's always wanted from the older brother that she respects so much. Conquering her fears and full of determination from her brother's words, Rukia unveils the full power of Sodai no Shirayuki, and with just the release of her incomplete Bankai, one-shots Asnot. Rukia's Bankai was something every Bleach fan wanted to see, and Kubo didn't disappoint, giving us one of the coldest designs in the series, no pun intended. Asnot representing all of Rukia's fears, loneliness, inadequacy, the inability to protect her friends, every fear she's ever felt up until this point, only to be blown away and shattered apart, is such a massive moment for her as a character, and one of the most satisfying to see as a viewer. At this point, Kubo was being rushed to finish the series, but despite that, he managed to execute Rukia's most important moment extremely well. While we all would have loved to see a longer fight and have more scenes of Rukia's Bankai, the fact that merely releasing her Bankai instantly ends the fight is part of what makes it so impactful and satisfying. I don't think it would have been as cathartic if there was a longer battle, with more of a back and forth between the two, so I think the way Kubo handled it was the right choice. Byakuya acknowledging his sister's strength is a great emotional payoff between the two, and solidifies them into my top two favorite sibling dynamics in fiction. One thing I've waited to mention until now is how Rukia grinds through the Shinigami ranks as the series goes on. When we first meet her, she's unseated, then later on becomes a lieutenant until finally becoming the captain of the 13th Division. A common consensus, particularly when it comes to Western female characters, is that they tend to fall into one of two extremes, that being either borderline irrelevant or an unlikable Mary Sue. And for any aspiring writer looking for an example of how to do a strong female character right, I think Rukia is a prime example. If I were to summarize my thoughts on Rukia as a character, I'd say she's an extremely likable and selfless person who carries the weight of the world on her shoulders, taking on responsibilities that aren't always her own. She has a fiery temper and a no-nonsense attitude that's used effectively in the right situations and is balanced out by her more gentle, feminine side, which prevents her from coming off as overbearing or annoying, which is a trap many female characters fall into. Her abilities are some of the coolest in the series, and the same goes for her designs. Kubo really cooked with her designs in the Fullbring arc and the War arc, with her Bankai being my favorite within the entire story. Despite Rukia not being a particularly powerful character throughout the series, Kubo manages to keep her relevant and give her extremely important roles, always managing to kick the story into motion or have an effect on the characters around her. She doesn't hold grudges and she never complains about her circumstances. All of the reasons we've discussed throughout the video is what makes Rukia not only my favorite character within the story of Bleach, but my favorite female character of all time. I think she's a prime example of a strong female character done right, and this video is really just my love letter to the character. If you made it this far, please consider dropping a like on the video and subbing to the channel, so I know that you want more videos like this. But besides that, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you next time.